So what I want to talk to you today is about the proposed bill the Harper government wants to put through. There are two of them actually that would essentially help police fight cyber criminals, but at the same time threaten the privacy of online users. The first bill, which would compel internet service providers to store people's information, and the second bill would allow police to access that information without a warrant. So my first question is about the first bill, that's ISPs storing people's information. Is that a good idea?
Well, I mean, anytime you place large volumes of confidential information in one spot, you open up a security hole or a security risk. So the question really is do we trust our ISPs to be shepherds or stewards of huge databases of personally identifiable information? And is the government right to be essentially deputizing the ISPs into helping them engage in law enforcement activities? The government isn't going to be holding on to this information. The ISPs, which are profit-seeking organizations, will be doing so on behalf of the government. As citizens, it's entirely fair for us to ask, is this really in our best interest?
So do you think that they might ever take that information and give someone who's not the government access to it?
Well, you know, I don't know every last employee that works for my ISP, but I'm a cynic. So the first thing that I'm thinking is it opens up the potential for someone who works for the ISP who is not perhaps security cleared, who is not perhaps an expert in security protocol, who may either deliberately or inadvertently expose my information to someone who really shouldn't be using it. And so do we trust our ISPs to keep essentially Pandora's box closed? And I think based on the history of the Internet, where there's essentially a major breach almost constantly, I think it's fairly fair for us to assume that at some point this is going to result in a breach of private information. ISPs are not security experts. Certainly they engage in security, but they are not, for example, as rabid about security as a bank would be, for example, or an insurance company.
Okay. And what about the second bill that would allow police to access this information without a warrant? Could that go wrong?
It certainly can, because it renders us as citizens fairly vulnerable to execution of legal recourse without due process. One of the things that separates a country like Canada from less democratic nations is that we are subject to due process and due diligence, so that if we are in fact suspected of committing a criminal act, that law enforcement agencies will in fact go and get a warrant and will follow accepted procedures to investigate whether in fact we have or have not committed a crime. Once you throw that out the window, you really do you do run the risk of falling down a very slippery slope. What's to stop anyone who works for a law enforcement agency from just looking us up any day? Now that they've got these huge databases at the ISP, they can essentially do whatever they want with that data, and we have no recourse. So as much as we want our law enforcement agencies to have the ability to go after online criminals and child pornographers and others like that, at the same time, we don't want to lose our right to privacy and our right to due process at the same time.
Yeah, one thing I'm wondering, could they just instead of searching up individuals, search up, say, keywords, and find individuals perhaps who had no record, who they weren't looking up, but they find these keywords that they associate with criminal activity, and they start looking through this person's history. Is that something that could happen?
Sure. The technology that they're talking about makes it all too easy for absolutely innocent individuals to get swept up in huge investigations. For example, someone who is in fact doing research on child pornography for a university, and in fact has used online search engines to look for the kinds of things that child pornographers might look for, might very well get caught up in the same net. And in the absence of a search warrant, might in fact find him or herself, being arrested at the same time as a real child pornographer. And so this really does open up a whole new layer of risk for us, and we really do have to ask ourselves the question: if we want to give our law enforcement agencies better tools to take on cybercrime, do we want to, what are we willing to give up in the process?
Okay, so there's a real risk of essentially these searches being taken out of context.
Very much so.
This is not the first time they've tried to pass a bill like this. It's the fourth time, I think, and the other ones have died. Is there anything different about these bills? Any reason these ones might make it through?
When you put all of the bills together, there isn't anything materially different this time as compared to last time. I think the three previous times that legislation was tabled and ultimately died. What's different here is the timing. The Harper government believes that that an election is not imminent, therefore it will not die on the docket when an election is called like it did those previous times. But in terms of the proposed legislation itself, it doesn't differ too much from what was tried previously.
Okay, and my last question for you. If this is not a good way to fight cybercrime, what would be a good alternative?
The answer is resources. Police forces everywhere are screaming that they don't have enough resources to fight crime online. And the answer does not lie in simply tweaking legislation, because you can tweak legislation until the cows come home, but if you don't have the trained bodies on the ground to execute on that legislation, you will be no closer to solving these crimes than you were before. So really what governments at all levels everywhere have to look at is not changing the legislative framework, because frankly I don't think there's a whole lot more that they can do, but really questioning the priorities with which they fund law enforcement activities, and perhaps considering shifting more of those funds into the cybercrime area.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, Carby. I'm going to grab the next person, Lauren, who's going to talk to you now, okay?
Okay, great. Thanks, Trevor.
One second.